87-2022 Inflation Reduction Act. Hey everybody, welcome back to Michael's Matters. And of course, as per usual, I am Michael. And something very interesting has been happening over these last couple of weeks or so. And pretty much to much of everybody's surprise, Congress, the White House, and all the legislative branches are all getting together as a government, as a whole, and they are actually starting to get some things done. I mean, isn't that how it always really works? I mean, the last 24 hours before your project is due is your most productive. But instead of a report on, let's say, the California emission system, Congress has put together a bill that will have huge benefits to seniors, people on Social Security retirement, Social Security disability, Medicare, as well as SSI, and other state pension plans. So this is going to include things like putting a cap on how much money somebody can pay for their medications, which we all know over the last couple of years has gone through the roof, even more so during the pandemic. And so what it'll do is it'll bring down the cost of specific super expensive medications for things like diabetes, for things like cancers, as well as Alzheimer's, and also allow the government to actually begin to negotiate on behalf of the U.S. citizens for lower drug prices. So we don't have to be the only country in the world who pays exorbitant prices for prescription drugs anymore. Now, of course, as it sits here on, I guess today is Sunday, it's not a done deal yet. In fact, the Democrats are using an obscure process called reconciliation to even get this measure passed. But if it does go through, it'll mean savings of thousands of dollars a year for those seniors and retirees who use programs like Medicare as well as the Medicare Part D program. So today, we're talking about the maybe optimistically named Inflation Reduction Act, how it may affect the 64 million seniors on Medicare, in what ways it'll put more money into their pockets, and really honestly, whether or not this bill can actually pass as it sits in its current form. Now, this is Michael's Matters, and before we get to it, if you like these videos, if you find them interesting, if you find them helpful, if you at least find them useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when my newest and most informative videos come out. All right, now let's get down to it. So let's start off today by talking a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act, which right from the start seems like an interesting rebranding, especially because for all intents and purposes, this bill is really just a pared down, a mini wish list of what the original Build Back Better behemoth bill originally was. The primary reason for this is that the Democrats are using a process called reconciliation that limits the measures in this bill to things that only directly affect the budget. So there are quite a few things that did not meet those stringent criteria, so they had to be left out. And even a few things that maybe were in the kind of the gray zone that were eventually tossed out by the Senate referee. And in these matters, that person is called the Senate parliamentarian, which to me, the name seems a little bit of House of Lords to me, a little too much. But I guess that's what they call it, so be it. Now, the bill has things in it that are meant to help fight climate change, as well as new taxes for higher earning Americans, that's Americans who earn over $400,000 a year, and put more taxes on corporations, and in fact, a flat 15% tax on corporations, which of course is going to make those folks grumble. But what is most interesting to me, and what has made it so far in the bill, again, as of Sunday, are some of the core measures that are meant to put literally thousands of dollars back in the pockets of seniors and retirees across this country. This is because things like limiting the yearly amount that a person can pay for their medications is included in there, which right now we know there is no technical limit to how much a retiree or a person on Medicare can pay for their prescriptions under the Medicare Part D plan. Another interesting measure is that one that would allow the U.S. government to use its bargaining power as the largest drug buyer in the country to negotiate rates, which it currently cannot do. But like I said, some of the best measures, they didn't actually cut the mustard as far as the reconciliation rules. It had to be left out on the cutting room floor. So things like a $35 cap on insulin, which has seen, again, huge rises in prices over the last few years, and for the last decade for that matter. Additionally, another provision that was cut was a penalty or an excise tax on prescription drug makers who raise their prices too fast over the rate of inflation, which would force them, if they got the penalty, to pay a tax that amounted to 95% of the cost of the drug. So basically removing all sort of profit that they would have made. But again, the parliamentarians said that that would not fly either, which if this bill passes now would leave folks outside of Medicare who are not getting the deal to deal with drug companies essentially charging them more for the same drug to compensate for the loss of profit that they would have gotten from Medicare patients, but they're now not getting because it got negotiated down. So that is sort of a bummer. So let's talk a little bit about more of the details of the aspects of the bill that will likely pass and how that could affect the way that seniors and retirees and anyone who's on Medicare pay for their prescription drugs. The one thing that I think is the biggest, hairiest deal, and it doesn't seem to be getting much airtime, is a $2,000 cap of the out-of-pocket prescription drug cost. Of course, this is not as flashy as the Medicare negotiating drug prices or saving the climate, but I think that it is one low-key way that will be most beneficial to the largest numbers of seniors. This is because right now, if you are on Medicare, you have to get your prescriptions through something that is called a Medicare Part D plan, which is basically started in 2023 to help Medicare beneficiaries pay for their prescriptions because the cost was going up so astronomically. Right now, there is no portion of original Medicare, that's just Part A and Part B, that actually does pay for prescriptions. So that's why you have to get one of those private Part D plans. But on these plans, again, there's no limit to how much you can pay for medications. And there is first a deductible that you have to pay, and then you pay co-pays. And if you get to a high enough amount that you've paid in throughout the year, it goes down to a smaller percentage of the amount that you have to pay per drug and starts over annually. But it also means that your prescription drugs, the cost is unlimited, right? So it doesn't matter how many co-pays you have or how much you pay. There's no point where it stops. The measure in this bill would cap a person's drug bill at $2,000. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but some folks who are taking essentially trash bags full of medications on a daily basis will attest that they pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year just for medications, not including all their other medical care under the current Part D plan. So a $2,000 limit, that would be an absolute lifesaver. It will allow them to use their money for other things that are important, like life and food and rent and all those other things and gas that are going up astronomically. Now, if it does pass, it would not go into effect until 2025, but almost immediately, once it does pass in that same year, those utilizers of medications on the Medicare Part D plan would feel the benefits. Now, the next big provision in the bill is one that would allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Finally. Now, this is one that gets so much hype because, yes, it's a big deal, that is true, but also because it's a political victory. It's something that the Democrats can say, hey, they did it, they did good in a vital election year. They can use it to justify, being reelected. Also, it gets a lot, and I mean a lot of pushback from drug companies for obvious reasons, because it would mean less profit. But it only makes sense to have Medicare, a giant drug purchaser, to be able to negotiate their rates. I mean, any other big purchasers, people like Walmart or Costco or Amazon, they would never go into a deal like this and not try to throw their purchasing power around. But because of a strong lobbying of the pharmacy and pharma money in Congress, Medicare had been barred from negotiating its prices. And in practice, to start, Medicare would only really be able to negotiate the rates of 10 medications, most likely the ones that are the most expensive and the most difficult to get. And that wouldn't start until 2026. Then, as of 2029, it would be expanded to 20 medications in which they could negotiate the price for. But even this small number of top dollar medications, if they can negotiate those prices out and get a reasonable price, it'll save the government billions of dollars, Medicare beneficiaries thousands of dollars, and hey, it may even add a couple years to the already flailing Medicare program. Now, despite seeming like a pretty good idea, when you know it, there are a sizable amount of the vested interest, i.e. pharma and their congressional allies, and really Republicans who are probably for this, but just don't want the Dems to have a win like this in an election year. But overall, these folks altogether are not on board with these changes. For the obvious reasons. First is that it would mean less profit for the pharmaceutical companies. And if there's one thing that corporations hate the most, it's less profit. But additionally, purportedly, non-biased entities, folks like the CBO, or as they are known, the Congressional Budget Office, have their doubts about how well this bill overall will do, as the name suggests, in reducing the actual inflation. The CBO, which is an agency that scores bills, seems to be doubtful of the ability of the Inflation Reduction Act to actually reduce any inflation. Rather, the CBO found that in an initial study for the years of 2022 and 2023, the Inflation Reduction Act would have a quote-unquote negligible effect on inflation. But it also says that by 2031, it may save the government $288 billion. So that doesn't seem very negligible to me, but I guess with inflation, the way it is going, by 2031, it may cost just $10 billion for a bundle of bananas, or maybe a bushel of bananas. Maybe it's a bunch of bananas. whatever it is, it may not be that much money by the time we get to 2031. Now, of course, on the other hand, the big pharma folks are saying that allowing Medicare to negotiate prices, i.e. forcing them to sell some specific drugs for less and thus losing profit, would cause them to have less money for research and development and less money for new life-saving drugs. I mean, I even hear commercials right now on the radio telling me to call my senator to not vote for this bill. But again, the CBO, when they studied this portion of the bill, had estimated that only 15 fewer drugs would be reaching the market over the next 30 years if it was ever enacted. That is 15 out of a totality of an expected 1,300 drugs overall that would hit the markets over the next 30 years. So that doesn't sound like a big deal, but the big question, of course, when it comes to drugs are what are those 15 drugs who don't make it to the market? I mean, in this case, it's not about the quantity of drugs. It's more about what the drugs do and the quality of the drugs that do end up showing up. So overall, this is a pretty sticky situation with our country in the way that our healthcare system runs. Sure, it is pretty efficient and it is pretty innovative because the profit motive is so strong to get folks to do stuff. But also, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that every dollar in this industry is somebody's paycheck. And when you deal with the industry that are so powerful, so wealthy, and so influential on the health of our community, we start taking dollars away, it could definitely lead them to just not be as innovative or just not be as effective as they were previously. So I can definitely see both sides of that. Now that being said, I think Medicare, like Walmart or Costco or even the US military, should be able to throw around their purchasing power to get the best deal for their shareholders and their stakeholders, who are us, the American people, and those seniors and retirees who need medications for their life, but who are struggling to pay for them. And still, this seems like a much better alternative than raising taxes even more just to pay the pharma companies whatever they actually want to ask for the medications, but rather negotiating prices down and saving money that way. The nice thing about this being a free market in the country that we live in also means that if the big dogs, those big pharma dogs, they don't want to do it for lower prices, you know what? Somebody else will come along who does. And that is the beauty of the market that we live in and really the best of both worlds. All right, so that's it for today's Michael's Matters. I really appreciate you all watching this to the very end. And if you do like these videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And that way you can get updates when my newest and most informative videos come out. So for Michael's Matters, I'm Michael, hoping that you take care of yourself, take care of others, and have a happy, healthy